This is the Plagmanrules Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition. And I do apologize that I did not get a version of the podcast up on Monday. Things just got a little too hectic. So, we're going to talk about a couple of the subjects that were meant to be on Monday's podcast show, which would have been a look at the weekend box office. And I also saw Mother over the past weekend there, so I'm going to review that here today. Also, we're just going to briefly talk about the new Terminator movie. Kind of some early thoughts on that from what I've heard and what's supposedly going to happen and all that. And we'll just talk about that a little bit. Okay, so let's start with what happened to the box office last weekend. So Kingsman: The Golden Circle came in first place with $39 million, which was a little bit above the $36 million that the first film did. And I have to remember, a lot of people have painted this to be a disappointing opening. I tend to disagree with that. Now, we have to remember that the first Kingsman movie opened in February of 2015 against 50 Shades of Grey, so it was a very nice counter-programming kind of movie. And that film went on to be a decent hit at the box office. Now this one, it's opening at the end of September, which is not common for these kind of action movies, and especially not for an action movie sequel. And we also do have to remember that the competition here is a little bit stiffer. Whereas, sure, we had 50 Shades of Grey making a lot of money back in February 2015 when that opened. Here, it is doing a lot better business than 50 Shades, and we've also got the Lego Ninjago movie, which opened, and a few other things here and there. In the smaller box office realms, that's been doing well here over the past few weeks. Plus, we have to remember that the critical reviews for the first Kingsman movie were pretty good. A lot of people really liked it. I was okay on it. I didn't like it as much as other people, but the sequel is getting not so positive reviews, a lot of mixed reviews and stuff. And I haven't quite seen it yet. I'm planning to see it very soon here. But I do think that what's going to happen here as we come into this weekend, I think we're going to see a much bigger drop than we did the first Kingsman. And we do have a couple new movies opening up here. I don't think either of them are going to be too damaging, but at the same time, I think it and the Kingsman are going to be in a very close battle for the number one spot here this coming weekend. Speaking of it, that dropped another 50% last weekend for another $29.7 million. And I've just learned today that that film has crossed $500 million at the worldwide box office. So that's more than a big success for the $35 million movie. And it's a gigantic success for any Stephen King adaptation, for New Line, and for horror movies in general. Then we had the Lego Ninjago movie open in third place with $20.4 million. Now, this one kind of hurts. Now, first of all, when you compare it to the Lego movie, which opened to like 70-something million back in 2014, then you had the Lego Batman movie open to north of 50 million back in February. These are pretty disappointing numbers there. And one thing we do have to remember as well with this is that the Ninjago brand is pretty popular for those Lego enthusiasts, but it's not really something that the common family audience knows off the top of their head. And also, it's kind of shocking this movie didn't do better, because when it comes to family movies at the box office, we have been very much lacking in competition here over the past couple months. Really, Despicable Me 3 is the only one, as I've mentioned several times now, that has really truly done very well, exceedingly great box office reception there. Everything else has either been a disappointment or under expectations, or it's been a downright disaster. While I'm not really out to say this one's a disaster, and critical reviews have a thing to do with that too, because the first two Lego movies very well received by audiences and critics. Ninjago is a lot of mixed reception there. So I wouldn't call this one a disastrous opening, but I would say it was a disappointing one for sure, especially with tracking indicating an opening actually close to 40 million at some points. So yeah, that's not great. Then we had a couple of below-the-radar kind of films opening up last weekend as well. Friend Request, which really died at $2 million, and it was in over 2,500 theaters. The per-theater average was less than $1,000. Not a great sign. And again, I think Mother and It being out there, those kind of hurt. And then we had Stronger, and that's the new Jake Gyllenhaal Boston Marathon bombing drama. And that one did okay for its opening. It opened to 1.6 million in 573 theaters. It's going to expand a little bit this weekend, closer to 700 theaters. But we'll see if this one continues to grow there, or if it's just going to, just not be a terrific kind of movie for them. And it kind of does remind me a little bit of Patriots Day. Remember that one opened up back in January, and since they're both dealing with the same relative subject matter of the Boston Marathon bombing, that movie, I remember I was pegging it to be a really big opener for January, but it died at the box office. Just the interest just wasn't there. And I do think that since this one is coming so close off of that one with the same subject matter, and even though it's following a different person, it just doesn't seem like the audience is all that interested at this point. But then again, we do have to remember this movie is not going to be in wide release here for probably another couple weeks. So we'll see if this one is any good. And this is another one I do plan to see here very soon. We had a couple other limited releases to talk about here. The first one, Brad's Status. I didn't mention this one the week prior. That one opened very, very well in limited release. And now when it got to 450 theaters, now it's just a little under $1 million. It's actually about 953,000. So that one is doing very well in its limited release. Then we had Battle of the Sexes. That one earned a little over $500,000 in 21 theaters. So that one did just a little bit below $25,000 as the per theater average. Very good opening there. And it is going into wide release this weekend. And unfortunately, it's not playing in my local area yet, so I have to wait a little while on that one. And then Victoria and Abdul opened over the previous weekend as well, and that one, only in 4 theaters, earned $158,000 for a per-theater average of just under $40,000. Now, that one, the reviews are kind of pretty scattered. Some people liked it, some people thought it was okay. Not a lot of people thought it was terrible, but there's still bad reviews in there. Usually when something like that happens with a limited movie like this, sometimes the box office, even in its opening weekend like this, just dies. But not the case here. There's an audience for the movie for sure. And yeah, we can expect that one to start expanding here in the next coming weeks. Okay, now let's get into this Terminator bullshit. Just to kind of run through the franchise up to this point. So obviously T1 and T2, James Cameron's films, I'm kind of in a battle with myself a lot of the time as far as which film is better, the first one or the second one, because they're both very different movies. The first one is kind of more of a horror movie mixed in with machinery and action, set pieces and everything. And then the second movie is pretty much a straight up action movie with some sci-fi elements to it. And both of them, for what they are outstanding and pretty much the quality kind of given piece of each of their genres. It's like if you're going to do a movie like this, you usually try to aim for the target that both T1 and T2 hit. And then, of course, years later we got Terminator 3, which I didn't hate. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. It was fun, kind of a fun movie. But it just felt like, in retrospect, the first 2 Terminators were about something. They were about human life going on against incredible odds and humans versus machines and all that, which sure, those were touched upon in Terminator 3, but it just felt so watered down and so much like a theme park ride at times that it really got distracting. And it also just didn't do it for me. Some of the actors they cast in it just didn't work. But then we get Terminator Salvation, and I've pretty much blocked this one out of my memory, so I don't remember the exact plot. I don't remember the characters' names except for Christian Bale as John Connor. I don't remember what the hell Helena Bonham Carter was doing in the movie or who she was. But that movie was just such a train wreck and just such a bad move. Even though it had the position to be the first Terminator movie to really introduce that future, which is what I think everybody wanted to see. They just really crapped the bed on that one. So that one pretty much turned me off to the Terminator franchise. I never saw the newest one, Terminator Genesis, with its horrible spelling. That was another turnoff for me. Plus the ads didn't really get me. And then the really bad word of mouth, yeah, I went ahead and skipped it. So now that the rights have converted back to original creator James Cameron, now he's trying to really get the gun rolling again on this. And it's getting to the point now to where I just don't really care about the Terminator franchise anymore. Now, I know there's still a very, very active fan base here in the franchise that wants to see it go on and on and on and never stop and so on and so forth. But it's just that at this point, and again, having me personally not having seen Genesis, the common word on the street is they have made more bad Terminator movies than good. And it's been 25 plus years, that's more than a quarter of a century, since we've had a Terminator movie knock it out of the park, of course, with Terminator 2. So, since then, we've gotten the news that yes, Cameron is getting the franchise rights back. and that Tim Miller, who directed Deadpool, is going to be in the director's chair. Now, nothing against Tim Miller here, but I just feel like if you're going to get this Terminator franchise back on track, you need to get an established name here. And I don't mean to say that Tim Miller is not an established name. I mean, Deadpool put him on the map in a big way, but I just think he needs somebody who's been around the block. So I'm saying maybe somebody who's, 50 plus and who has been in the movie industry for a while. Somebody who can kind of rein James Cameron down, because sometimes, he gets a little out there. Like a lot of his Wonder Woman comments have been really out to lunch. We need somebody to kind of take control there. And I'm not saying Tim Miller can't do that, but I just feel like he could be in a position to be the Josh Trank here, where he gets a little bit of being bossed around and stuff. And again, that's not to say that's exactly what is happening, but I've been hearing secondhand that he is actually very much in command of the project, and that James Cameron is kind of cheerleading him in this project and saying, yep, go do this, go do that, kind of thing. And since then, we've also learned that both Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton are coming back to their respective roles. Of course, Arnold's going to be one of the Terminators, and Linda Hamilton is going to be Sarah Connor. Now, here's the thing with me. Schwarzenegger, at least career-wise, he needs something big. He needs something to get him back on track and get him out of these direct-to-DVD kind of movies. Because even though, yes, he is an action star and that's pretty much all he's good at the same time, there are moments in, like, the end of T2 where he shows he actually does have some dramatic chops. And, I didn't see it, but the movie he did with, I can't even remember the actress's name, but the one where his daughter becomes a zombie or something. I just saw the ads for it and I'm like, well, actually, Arnold looks like he's committing and doing a good job here. Again, I never did see the movie, so maybe it was just Regardless, I just think that Arnold needs a hit. But at the same time, I just think he needs to distance himself as far away as he can from this role. I was very disappointed when I heard that Arnold is not going to be a part of the new Predator movie that Shane Black is doing now. It comes out next summer. I think next summer or sometime next year. But it's just like, okay, Arnold, you did Predator once and it was terrific. You've done Terminator, what would it be, roughly 4.5 times now, if whatever you count from Terminator Salvation, whatever that was. But still, he is just getting, and I don't want to say he's too old for it, but it's just too much of the same thing. And I think he needs to distance himself from it and take on other projects as an actor. And in that regard, then it doesn't make sense to bring Linda Hamilton back if I'm kind of following my viewpoint here, because I'm thinking you just need to start fresh with this. Start somewhere else. We've had several takes on what's happened in the past and what's happening in the present, or at least present by the movie standards. I think it's time to go back and do what Terminator Salvation did, where it's in the future, it's a war movie, but just do it right. Don't do that stupid storyline of another kind of cybernetic character, whatever Sam Worthington's character was. I can't even remember what the whole plot of it was, but kick that stuff out and just be an all-out war movie. Don't worry about the time travel stuff. Don't worry about John Connor trying to reprogram Cyber9 and all that. No. Just do a war movie. Just do a big action spectacle that gets people's attention, gets eyes on the project that have not been there before. Do what Mad Max Fury Road did, because Mad Max Fury Road was not a direct sequel. It didn't exactly go off of what happened in the past 3 movies clear back in the 70s and 80s. It did its old thing, it recasted, and it pretty much just told an action story that was set in the Mad Max world. That's what Terminator needs to do, I feel. I feel that's their best angle at success, is to distance themselves from the whole storyline of time travel and all that, and just start new with a new John Connor, a new, all these other characters. I don't know if you need Kyle Reese in there or not. I didn't necessarily think that he was a good part of Salvation anyways, but just do something like that. Just be an all-out action spectacle. But that's not what we're getting here. So that means that my whole idea is out the window, because they're bringing like Linda Hamilton back and she's going to be her age, Arnold's going to be his age, and it's a whole new story and all that, but oh well. So what do I think about Linda Hamilton coming back? great. I haven't seen her in a long time. This is obviously her most famous role. Let her come back to it, and I think that could be a really fun treat to see her in action again. And a lot of people compared it to like The Force Awakens, to where you finally get to see Han Solo back on screen. You finally get to see Princess Leia, who's now General Leia, and you get to see Luke Skywalker, very briefly. But it's like, it's that familiarity element that comes back, which I think could really be a treat for the fans. And, that's probably not going to be a criticism of this whole thing, but still, I just don't know if I would have liked the story. Plus, they're doing this whole thing of ignoring Terminator 3, Terminator Salvation, and ignoring Genesis, and instead this is going to be like a direct sequel to Terminator 2. Now, this can work. There have been some movies in the past that have tried to do this. Some have worked somewhat, some have worked not at all, so we'll see what happens. But we'll see here. It's not the worst idea in the world, but I just don't know how far you're going to go with that. And, all the full story details are not really on point yet, and obviously we don't want to know the full plot at this point. But it's also been talked about that this is going to be the first of a new Terminator trilogy, which I don't know. And from what I've heard, the plan is trilogy, but start with making a good first movie, which is probably the best counter you can say to that, which I do agree. Yes, if you're going to do a trilogy, yeah, you can set up some elements and say, hey, we'll come back to this later and all that, but make a good first movie. I think as long as they do that, then the rest of it will come naturally. And now the last piece of news that we've learned on this is that this is going to open in July of 2019. It's actually going to be the end of July, and not too long after the live-action remake of The Lion King. So, I guess you guys are ready to shoot yourself in the foot with that? I mean, that's the stupidest place to put the movie. If I were them, you're trying to really restart this franchise and get the ball rolling again with your original cast, or as many as you can get. Go ahead and put this in a spot where you've got a good ground to build on. I think the best spot for a new Terminator movie would actually be October of 2019, or, wait until sometime in 2020, whatever long it takes to get everything going. But I would say, yeah, October, because that's a good time. We're going to see if that's going to work out for the sci-fi genre in a couple of weeks with the new Blade Runner. And I think that the original Terminator, Terminator 1, opened in October of 1984. And that movie, even though the numbers are really, really, really low when you compare it from then to today, but it was still at the time a sizable hit. So, I think October would be a good time. We don't really see a lot of action movies in October. Some of them are okay, some of them do well. But I think it is a good spot because you don't have to worry about the summer competition. The winter competition with November, December releases aren't out yet. And it can really build legs and have a good domestic run in October, I think. You open it in the first 2 weekends of October away from another kind of big project, and I think you'll be okay. And to confirm my point, I'm looking now at the schedule for 2019 for what's coming out. And sure, you've got the planned new James Bond movie coming out in November. You've got Frozen 2 coming out in November. You've got Wonder Woman 2, Masters of the Universe, Star Wars Episode 9, and the Wicked movie coming out in December. But you don't really have too much else coming out here in October. Actually, no releases planned in October from what I'm seeing here. September, we'll have the It sequel, It Chapter 2, or whatever they're going to call it. They're planning on another Angry Birds movie. We'll see if that happens. And there's a couple other unknown movies at this point. But October looks pretty blank. I would say go ahead, get away from that summer competition, open in a time when you can control the market. Because when you look right now, just to pull it up here, at what else is coming out in July, you've got the Spider-Man Homecoming sequel coming out right after Independence Day. You've got the sequel to Top Gun coming out the next week. And then the next week is the one we already talked about, the Lion King live-action remake. So you're really going up creek without a paddle here, opening it in late July. Now, obviously, worse things have happened to movies as far as release dates go, and sometimes it just works out anyways. But if I were Terminator and you're working on not really solid ground here, just open it in a time when you can get a hold of the market and control it. And if you put a stake there right now in 2019 in October, then a lot of other potentially high market movies that could come out around that time, they're going to stay away and they're going to wait. I think that's the smartest move. But, and it could move. We don't know yet. But if I were them, I would very much consider moving that opening to October. All right, last thing on the docket for today is a review for Mother. I was also going to talk about kind of the state of original movies nowadays and maybe why Mother got such an intense negative reaction from some moviegoers, but I feel like I can only speak to that once we get into the full spoiler territory and once we actually get into a point to where everybody who wants to see it has seen it, and it's not a thing where people who are waiting to see it now who haven't been able to see it yet, they want to see it for themselves and not have it spoiled for them. And of course, when I do reviews, I don't do any spoilers in them. So I'll go ahead and I'll do my review now, and maybe one day we can get back to this and we might just talk about why I think this movie got such a negative response from some of the moviegoers. Darren Aronofsky has made perhaps the most divisive film in recent memory with Mother, a film whose true genre is kind of a spoiler, but I'll tell you this much, it's nothing like the horror thriller that the ads promised. I guess the easiest non-spoiler way to craft the movie is as a drama, but just about any movie has elements of drama in it these days, so I guess now you're just waiting to see what I have to say about the movie. Do I land on the side of it being a pretentious piece of art cinema that was whored into being a studio film, or on the side of it being an auteur expression and a statement film from Aronofsky that is worth being reviewed again and again? Well, I'm going to fall into the latter on this one. Okay, so to repeat the point, I do not do spoiler-filled reviews, and the plot of the movie is something of a spoiler, so I'll have to leave it at this. Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem play a married couple who have recently fixed up a house in the middle of nowhere. Early on, we get the sense that they're a married couple, but not a happily married couple. Potential trouble arrives when a man, and later his wife, arrive at their doorstep. And at first, they seem like easygoing folks who have come out to celebrate Bardem's character, an acclaimed author. However, when they overstep their bounds and more guests arrive, things get crazy, and sanity will be thrown out the window. Once again, I cannot go fully into why I really thought this movie was one of the most entertaining films so far this year, but I can say that it was one of the most entertaining films I've seen so far this year. Add to that, I think that this is one of Jennifer Lawrence's better performances, probably her best since American Hustle. Also, great jobs by Javier Bardem and Ed Harris. Michelle Pfeiffer gets some decent work here, but I wasn't as impressed with her as others have been. Still, the cast is all in for this one, and it shows. Aronofsky is also a director who's been criticized for sometimes going style over substance, but in this case, since the story is a relatively simple one, I didn't mind it so much. The camera work is good, the house's interior and exteriors are characters unto themselves, and the lack of musical score increases the tension of the plot as it goes. Really, I wish I could go further, but for those who have seen the movie and know what's up, not to go into spoiler territory, I'll say this. I liked what Aronofsky was doing. That's all I'll say. Now for the negatives of the movie. Again, I'm confined in what I can and can't say here. The choices he made as far as what the actual story is and what Mother is really all about is a fun, individual choice that I dug, but there's times when the film does wander into a somewhat predictable nature once we get into the actual plot. It wasn't a crucial blow by any means, but I was invested in the characters enough to the point where I knew what was going to happen, but I was still fascinated to see how exactly Aronofsky and company would present it, and if they could make it cinematic, and boy do they ever with a couple of extreme examples. Still, I guess there are some light plot holes here and there that get in the way and some ideas that work for a 90-second scene, but that don't really fit into the context of the full story, and they're there more for shock value and for filler. Again, I could bring up some examples, but we're getting back into spoiler territory. So at the end of the day, I can't quite go into a full discussion here as to why I think this is a brilliant, weird, and very original work that should be seen by film students, regular moviegoers, just about anybody who can see it, but going into the full explanations are tough at this stage. Maybe give it a couple months and I can revisit the film and tell you exactly why this could be a dark horse contender for some Oscar love, and maybe a spot on my top 10 list. This is a short review for now, but let's just hope this is an introduction to something bigger, and a film that tries for something very ambitious and makes it worth the time and effort to conceal. That's kind of the bottom line, I guess. For those who went in expecting one thing and came out seeing something else, was the subject matter really worth talking about, the story worth telling, and the experience one you felt was a fun joyride, or was it a frustrating mess that had you scratching your head the whole time? This is honestly one where I came out having a blast and really on a high, but for anyone else, it could be the exact opposite. My rating is a 9 out of 10. Alright, so yeah, hopefully here in the next few months we can go back and revisit Mother and maybe talk about it a little bit more. But until then, we've got no other things to talk about today. We're going to go ahead and come back on Monday. We'll talk about what happened at the weekend box office, and we've got New York Comic Con coming up here next week. that will be a subject probably for next Friday's podcast to see what happens. But we'll see what else happens here over the next few days. All right, until then, this has been the Plagman Rules Podcast.